I'm Lindsay, 34, and last month I discovered my entire savings account had been emptied after our annual family reunion. $87,000 gone. When I called my dad in a panic, his response chilled me to my core. "We needed it more than you did," he snorted, as if my years of careful saving meant nothing. That money was for my dream home, the foundation of my future. In that moment, I realized blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. My own family had stolen from me, and they felt entitled to do it. Before I dive into this nightmare, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had family betray your trust. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turned this devastating betrayal into the wake-up call they never expected. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, our family looked picture-perfect from the outside. The colonial-style house with the white picket fence, family barbecues in summer, and holiday cards featuring all 5 of us in coordinating outfits. But behind closed doors, the dynamics were anything but perfect. My father, Richard, was always the unquestioned authority in our home. A sales manager at a manufacturing company, he controlled every aspect of our lives, especially our finances. Dad would lecture us about saving money while simultaneously making impulsive purchases. A boat we rarely used, timeshare properties we couldn't afford, and get rich-quick investments that inevitably failed. Whenever these decisions backfired, it was never his fault. Someone else had given him bad advice, or the economy had changed, or the timing wasn't right. He'd rage around the house, slamming doors and making everyone miserable until the next opportunity came along. My mother, Diane, was the eternal peacekeeper. A part-time elementary school secretary, she dedicated her life to keeping Dad happy at all costs. "Your father works so hard for this family," she'd say when I questioned his decisions. "He deserves our support." What this actually meant was that she enabled his worst behaviors, defending him even when he was clearly wrong and expecting the rest of us to fall in line. If he spent their anniversary money on a useless gadget, she'd smile and say there's always next year. If he borrowed from her personal savings, she'd insist she didn't really need it anyway. Then there was my older brother, Thomas. 3 years my senior and Dad's obvious favorite, Thomas could do no wrong. When he got mediocre grades, Dad praised his street smarts. When he totaled his first car, Dad bought him a better one. Thomas learned early that charm and manipulation were more valuable than hard work, and he perfected these skills into adulthood. He followed Dad into sales but jumped between companies every few years, always with a story about management not recognizing his talent. My younger sister, Melanie, was the baby of the family by 5 years. She watched and learned from all of us, ultimately becoming the most calculating. Beautiful and charismatic, she figured out how to play everyone against each other to get what she wanted. She'd whisper concerns about Thomas to Dad, then tell Thomas what Dad said behind his back. She'd cry to Mom about how mean I was, then apologize to me later, claiming Mom had pressured her to speak up. By the time she was a teenager, she'd mastered the art of emotional manipulation. And then there was me, Lindsay, the responsible middle child. From an early age, I recognized the dysfunction around me and decided I wanted something different. I worked hard in school, earned scholarships, and put myself through college studying computer science. While Thomas was asking Dad for money and Melanie was charging clothes to Mom's credit card, I was working part-time jobs and building my resume. My parents viewed my independence with a mixture of pride and suspicion. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" Dad would ask when I declined to participate in his latest investment scheme. After college, I landed a job as a junior developer at a respected tech company in Boston. While many of my colleagues moved to luxury apartments and leased expensive cars, I lived frugally. I rented a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Somerville, bought a reliable used Honda, and packed lunches instead of eating out. Every bonus and raise went straight into my savings account, earmarked for my future home. My family always found my financial discipline amusing. "Live a little," Thomas would say, showing off his designer watch. "You can't take it with you," Mom would add, encouraging me to join them on expensive family vacations I couldn't afford. Even Melanie, who was still in college when I started working, would tease me about my boring lifestyle. What none of them understood was the security I felt watching my bank account grow. Every $1,000 added represented freedom from the financial chaos I'd grown up with. I was determined never to live paycheck to paycheck, Never to lie awake at night worrying about bills, never to depend on anyone else for my financial well-being. There had been warning signs, of course. Small borrowings among family members were common, Dad using Mom's credit card without telling her. Mom taking cash from Melanie's graduation money to cover a shortfall. Thomas asking me for temporary loans that were never repaid. Each incident was smoothed over with excuses and promises, all wrapped in the expectation that family helps family. What I didn't realize, what they had carefully hidden from me, was that while I was building my financial security, theirs was crumbling. Dad's company was downsizing. Mom's school was cutting hours. Thomas's sales numbers weren't meeting targets. Melanie had maxed out multiple credit cards. They were desperate, and in their eyes, my savings account represented the solution to all their problems. I just didn't know it yet. The Hawkins family reunion had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. Every July, we gathered at a rented lake house in New Hampshire for a long weekend of boating, barbecuing, and reminiscing. This year's reunion seemed no different at first, the usual mix of forced bonding and underlying tension that characterized most of our family gatherings. I arrived Friday afternoon after taking a half-day from work. The lakefront property was impressive, more upscale than our usual rentals, with a sprawling deck and private dock. How did we afford this place? I asked Mom as she greeted me with a too-tight hug. Your father found a deal, she said vaguely, avoiding eye contact. You know how good he is at negotiating. Inside, the house was buzzing with activity. Cousins, aunts, and uncles moved between the kitchen and deck, carrying drinks and snacks. Dad held court by the grill, louder than usual, a tumbler of whiskey in hand despite it being barely 3 p.m. There she is, he boomed when he spotted me, the tech genius. Come give your old man a hug. His enthusiasm felt forced, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. As he embraced me, the smell of expensive cologne mixed with alcohol, and I noticed a new Rolex on his wrist. For someone who had recently complained about tough times at work, he seemed to be doing just fine. Thomas arrived shortly after me, pulling up in a brand new BMW convertible. Just leased it, he explained when I raised an eyebrow. Got an incredible deal through a client. I thought you mentioned your commission checks were down this quarter, I said, remembering our phone conversation just 3 weeks earlier when he'd hinted about possibly needing a small loan. Things turned around, he said dismissively. You worry too much, Linz. Melanie was already there when I arrived, helping Mom arrange flowers that looked far too expensive for a casual family gathering. She wore a designer sundress I recognized from a magazine and what appeared to be new diamond earrings. Cute earrings, I commented. Special occasion? These old things? She touched them self-consciously. I've had them forever, just haven't worn them in a while. Later that evening, after dinner, the conversation turned to everyone's updates. Cousin Sarah was pregnant with her second child. Uncle Bob had finally retired. Thomas announced he was considering buying a condo in the city. What about you, Lindsay? Aunt Karen asked. Still working at the same company? Yes, just got promoted to senior developer, actually, I said. And I'm finally ready to buy a house. I've been saving for years, and the market in my area is perfect right now. The momentary silence was subtle but noticeable. Dad took a large gulp of his drink. Mom suddenly became very interested in rearranging the dessert plates. Thomas and Melanie exchanged a quick glance. A house? Dad recovered quickly. That's a big commitment. Maybe you should wait a bit longer, see how the market develops. I've done my research, I said, pulling out my phone. I've even been pre-approved for a mortgage. Want to see the places I'm considering? I showed them photos of modest but charming properties in neighborhoods with good investment potential. Mom made appropriate, admiring noises, but her smile seemed strained. Melanie changed the subject as quickly as possible, launching into a story about her coworker's disastrous date. Throughout the weekend, I noticed other strange behaviors. Whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. Dad and Thomas having an intense discussion behind the boathouse, both looking grim. Mom being unusually generous, insisting on paying when a few of us went into town for ice cream, though I knew her part-time job at the school didn't pay well. On Saturday afternoon, I set up my laptop on the screened porch to check in on a work project. I stepped away to get a drink, and when I returned, I could have sworn I saw Dad quickly move away from my computer. Just seeing if you wanted to join the card game, he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "Is everything okay?" I asked later that night as we roasted marshmallows by the fire pit. "Everyone seems a bit off this weekend." "Everything's fine, honey," Mom assured me, patting my hand. "Just grown-up stuff, nothing for you to worry about." The dismissal stung. I was 34. Hardly a child, but it was typical of how my family viewed me, the responsible one who didn't need to be included in family problems. Sunday morning brought the usual round of goodbye hugs as everyone prepared to depart. Dad's embrace lasted longer than usual, almost desperate in its intensity. "You know we love you, right?" he said, his voice gruff. "Family takes care of family." "Of course, Dad," I replied, puzzled by his sudden sentimentality. Mom pressed a bag of leftovers into my hands, her eyes watery. "Call more often, okay? We miss you." Even Thomas seemed unusually affectionate, throwing an arm around my shoulders. "You're doing great, sis. Really great." Melanie hung back until the others had moved away, then hugged me quickly. "Thanks for coming," she said, a strange note in her voice. Was it guilt? I drove home with a vague sense of unease. Something had definitely been off about this reunion, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Everyone had been nice. Too nice, perhaps, and there had been those secretive conversations. But they were family. Whatever was going on, they'd tell me if it was important, right? How catastrophically wrong I was. Back home in my apartment by Sunday evening, I followed my usual end-of-weekend routine. Unpacked my bag, started a load of laundry, and sat down at my desk to review my weekly budget and prepare for the work week ahead. I opened my banking app to record the expenses from the trip. The numbers didn't make sense at first. I blinked hard, thinking I must have tapped the wrong account. My main savings account, the one with $87,000 earmarked for my house down payment, showed a balance of $43.21. My heart began to race. This had to be a mistake, a glitch in the app. I logged out and back in again. Same balance, $43.21. With trembling fingers, I opened my browser and logged into the bank's website directly. The result was the same. I checked my other accounts. Checking account drained to a mere $156.89. Secondary savings emptied completely. "This isn't possible," I whispered to my empty apartment. I called the bank's 24-hour customer service line, my voice rising in panic as I explained the situation. "Yes, Ms. Hawkins, I can see several transfers were made from your accounts over the past 2 days, the representative said calmly. Large transfers on Friday to an account at First National Bank, and then several smaller transfers on Saturday to accounts at various institutions. "I didn't make those transfers," my voice cracked. "This is fraud." "The transfers were authorized through your online banking, using your credentials and the security questions. They originated from a device that has accessed your account regularly. Friday, Saturday, while I was at the lake house. A device that regularly accessed my account, my laptop, which I'd brought to the reunion. The laptop I'd left unattended on the porch. I need to dispute these charges," I insisted. My computer was. I stopped mid-sentence as a horrible realization dawned on me. If someone had used my computer to make those transfers, who had access to it during the reunion? The bank representative promised to send me fraud paperwork but warned me that since the transfers were authorized using all my correct security information, the investigation might take time and had no guaranteed outcome. After hanging up, I checked my email. There they were, confirmation notices for all the transfers, which had apparently gone straight to my spam folder. The timestamps aligned perfectly with times I'd been away from my laptop during the reunion. With a growing sense of dread, I searched through the transfer details. Most were hard to trace, going to accounts identified only by numbers. But one, a transfer of $15,000, had gone to a name I recognized immediately: Richard Hawkins, my father. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself. My own father had stolen from me? It seemed incomprehensible, and yet the evidence was right in front of me. With shaking hands, I called his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried my mother, then Thomas, then Melanie. No one answered. I sent texts, first questioning, then pleading, then angry. No responses. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, my phone rang. Dad's number. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, skipping any greeting. My money is gone. Thousands transferred out while I was at the lake with all of you. Did you do this? The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. We needed it, he finally said, his voice flat, emotionless. The family needed it. The confirmation of my suspicions hit me like a physical blow. You stole from me, I whispered. Don't be so dramatic, Lindsay, he sighed, as if I were a child making a fuss over nothing. Thomas's business was failing. Your mother needed medical procedures. The house was about to be foreclosed on. We had no choice. No choice? My whisper became a shout. You had no choice but to steal my life savings? Money I've worked years to put aside? Money for my house? You're young. You can save it again, he dismissed. Family comes first, Lindsay. You know that. We raised you better than to be so selfish. Selfish? The word burned in my throat. How is it selfish to expect my own family not to steal from me? You could have asked, Dad. You could have talked to me. And what would you have said? His tone turned cold. Would you have given us what we needed, or would you have lectured us about budgeting and responsibility like you always do? We did what we had to do. I'm calling the police, I threatened, tears streaming down my face. He laughed. Actually laughed. Go ahead, tell them your father, with your permission, used your computer to transfer money to help the family. See how that goes? I never gave permission. Your word against ours, Lindsay. Your mother, brother, and sister will all confirm you offered to help. Who do you think the police will believe? One bitter daughter or an entire loving family? The call ended. I tried calling back, no answer. I tried my mother again, straight to voicemail. Same with Thomas and Melanie. Within minutes, I discovered they had all blocked my number. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the modest possessions I'd carefully selected over years of budgeting, and felt my entire world collapse. My savings were gone. My dream of home ownership had evaporated. And worst of all, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had orchestrated it all, then closed ranks against me without a moment's hesitation. That night, I curled up on my bathroom floor and sobbed until there were no tears left, the cold reality settling in. I was on my own, betrayed by the very people who should have protected me. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't imagine sitting through meetings and writing code while my entire life was imploding. My body felt hollow, as if all my vital organs had been scooped out and replaced with a dull, throbbing pain. After a sleepless night, I forced myself to take action. I called a lawyer, Jennifer Reeves, who specialized in financial fraud. She agreed to see me immediately, and 2 hours later, I sat in her downtown office, clutching a folder of bank statements and transfer records. This is an unfortunately complex situation, Jennifer said after reviewing my documents. While the evidence clearly shows unauthorized transfers, the fact that they were executed from your computer, using your credentials, creates a significant hurdle. But I didn't authorize them, I insisted. My father used my laptop while I wasn't looking. I understand, she said gently, but proving that will be difficult. And the family component complicates things further. Courts are often reluctant to get involved in family financial disputes without clear, irrefutable evidence of criminal intent. They stole $87,000, I said, my voice breaking. How is that not criminal intent? They'll claim it was a family arrangement, that you agreed to help them through a difficult time. It becomes a he said, she said situation. She paused, looking at me sympathetically. Have you tried talking to them? Sometimes the threat of legal action is enough to resolve these situations. They've blocked my calls, I explained. All of them. Then perhaps a formal demand letter from my office would get their attention, she suggested. It would outline the evidence we have and the potential consequences of not returning the funds. I agreed, and Jennifer drafted the letter immediately. It was sent by courier that afternoon, addressed to my parents' home. The response came the next day, not from my parents but from a lawyer representing the entire family. The message was clear. They denied any wrongdoing, claimed I had verbally agreed to provide financial assistance, and would vigorously defend against any malicious and unfounded legal claims. Following Jennifer's advice, I also filed a police report. The officer who took my statement was professional but not encouraging. Family fraud cases are tough to prosecute, he explained. Without clear evidence that you didn't authorize the transfers, And with multiple family members backing each other's stories, the district attorney is unlikely to pursue charges. I left the police station feeling even more defeated than before. That evening, my phone pinged with text messages, not from my parents or siblings, but from extended family members and family friends. "How could you threaten to sue your own parents, after all they've done for you?" wrote my Aunt Karen. "Your father is devastated. Is money really more important than family?" came from my Uncle Rob. The most hurtful was from my cousin Sarah, who I'd always been close to. "I thought I knew you, Lindsay. I never imagined you'd turn on your family when they needed you most." They had launched a preemptive strike, spinning a narrative where I was the villain, the selfish daughter who refused to help her family in their time of need, then reacted vindictively when they had no choice but to help themselves. My mother finally broke her silence with a single text. "After everything we sacrificed for you, I raised a stranger." No acknowledgement of what they'd done, no apology, just pure manipulation. By the end of the week, my boss, Mark, called me into his office. I had returned to work but was clearly struggling to focus. "Is everything all right, Lindsay? Your team mentioned you've been distracted. That's not like you." For a brief moment, I considered keeping my personal crisis private. But Mark had always been a supportive manager, and I desperately needed someone who might believe my side of the story. I told him everything. "Jesus," he said when I finished. That's unbelievable. Have you talked to a lawyer?" I nodded, explaining the legal challenges I was facing. "Take whatever time you need," he offered, "and if there's anything I can do to help, just ask." His kindness nearly broke me. After a week of being vilified by my family, having someone simply believe me felt like a precious gift. That weekend, my friend Kate drove up from New York to stay with me. We'd been roommates in college, and she was one of the few people outside my family who knew my entire history. "They've always taken advantage of you," she said bluntly as we shared a bottle of wine in my living room. "The responsible one, the reliable one, they've used those labels to manipulate you for years. But stealing my entire savings?" I shook my head. "I never thought they'd go this far." "Because you're a good person who wouldn't do that to someone else," Kate said. "But they're not like you, Lindsay. They never have been." She leaned forward, her expression fierce with loyalty. "And you need to stop trying to resolve this like a family disagreement. This is theft, plain and simple. You need to fight back." "How?" "The lawyer says it's my word against theirs." "The police won't help." "Then you find another way," Kate insisted. "You're brilliant with computers. You're methodical. You understand systems. Use that." A family friend, Pastor Williams, who had known us for years, offered to mediate a conversation. Desperate for any resolution, I agreed. My parents and siblings consented as well, perhaps hoping to end the situation without further legal escalation. We met at the church on a Tuesday evening. I arrived early, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and faint hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would admit what they'd done and offer some path to repayment. The meeting was a disaster. My father dominated the conversation, painting a tragic picture of a family in crisis who had turned to their daughter for help, only to be rebuffed. "We never wanted to access her accounts without explicit permission," he said, solemnly to Pastor Williams. "But she left her computer open knowing our situation, after hinting that she wanted to help but didn't want to officially know about it for tax reasons." It was a complete fabrication, but delivered with such conviction that I saw doubt flicker in Pastor Williams' eyes. My mother dabbed at tears that may or may not have been genuine. We raised her to believe family comes first. I don't know where we went wrong. Thomas and Melanie backed their story completely, adding details about conversations that had never happened, promises I had never made. When I finally got a chance to speak, my denial sounded weak, even to my own ears. The narrative they had constructed was comprehensive, consistent, and delivered with absolute certainty. Pastor Williams, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension, eventually suggested we all take time to reflect and pray on the importance of family bonds and forgiveness. I left the church feeling utterly defeated. In the parking lot, Melanie caught up with me, hanging back from the others. "Why are you making this so difficult?" she hissed. "Just let it go. It's only money." "It was my future," I said, my voice hollow. "Everything I worked for." She rolled her eyes, always so dramatic. "Look, Thomas's business is already turning around. Once things stabilize, maybe we can pay you back some of it." Some of it? The casualness with which she dismissed my loss was stunning. Be realistic, Lindsay. No one has that kind of money just lying around. With that, she turned and jogged back to join our parents and Thomas, all of them presenting a united front as they walked to their cars. That night, I hit rock bottom. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by printouts of bank statements, legal advice letters that led nowhere, and text messages that twisted the knife further. I had tried every proper channel: banks, police, lawyers, mediation. Nothing had worked. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to truly feel the anger I'd always suppressed. The responsible, reasonable daughter who always did the right thing was getting absolutely nowhere. Kate's words echoed in my mind. "You need to fight back." She was right. If traditional methods wouldn't work, I would find another way. I was done being the victim. From this moment forward, I would become something my family had never expected, their worst nightmare. The turning point came at 3:27 a.m., as I sat staring at my bedroom ceiling, exhausted but unable to sleep. A sudden clarity washed over me. Direct confrontation had failed because my family held all the cards: the united story, the social connections, the appearance of being the wronged parties. I needed to change the game entirely. I got out of bed, made a strong cup of coffee, and sat down at my desk with a fresh notebook. As a software developer, I approached problems methodically, breaking them down into manageable components. This situation required the same approach. First, I needed information. My family had clearly been hiding financial troubles from me, using my savings to patch holes in their sinking ship. Understanding exactly what those troubles were would be my first step. I created a separate, secure laptop setup dedicated solely to my investigation, ensuring no actions could be traced back to my primary devices. With my technical skills, I began gathering public records. Property tax information, business registrations, court records, anything that might give me insight into my family's true financial situation. What I discovered over the next 2 weeks was staggering. My father's company wasn't just downsizing, he had been quietly pushed out 6 months earlier following accusations of expense account irregularities. He was now consulting, but his LinkedIn profile was filled with endorsements from connections who, upon further investigation, either didn't exist or had connections to dummy companies. Thomas's business failure was far more sinister than a simple bankruptcy. He had been running a small investment operation that showed all the classic signs of a Ponzi scheme, promising unrealistic returns, using new investor money to pay earlier investors, and skimming substantial amounts for personal use. The business hadn't just failed, it had defrauded dozens of people, many of them retirees from our old neighborhood who trusted the Hawkins family name. My mother's medical procedures turned out to be a series of expensive cosmetic surgeries, a facelift, liposuction, and other treatments at a luxury medical spa in Connecticut. She had charged them to multiple credit cards that were now in collections. Melanie's financial situation was perhaps the most surprising. She and her boyfriend were involved in an elaborate credit card fraud operation, opening cards using slightly altered versions of their names and personal information, maxing them out, and then disputing the charges or claiming identity theft. Every piece of information I uncovered was carefully documented, categorized, and stored securely. I created spreadsheets tracking every penny taken from my accounts, where it had gone, and how it had been spent. I mapped connections between my family's fraudulent activities, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities. 2 weeks into my investigation, I consulted with a different kind of professional. Frank Diaz was a retired financial investigator who now worked privately for banks and insurance companies. Kate's father had worked with him years ago and made the introduction. We met at a quiet cafe in Cambridge, far from my usual haunts. "You've done impressive groundwork," Frank said, reviewing my findings. "Most people in your situation are too emotional to be this thorough." "I can't afford to be emotional," I replied. "Not anymore. So what's your goal here? Criminal charges against your family?" I considered the question carefully. Justice, restitution, and making sure they can never do this to anyone else or to me again. Frank nodded approvingly. "Then you need to be strategic. The legal system might eventually work in your favor, but it's slow and unpredictable. Your family has created a unified front, which makes criminal charges difficult to pursue. But their house of cards has serious structural weaknesses. He pointed to my notes on Thomas's investment scheme. This is vulnerable to SEC investigation. He tapped on the section about my father's employment deception. This could trigger fraud investigations. He moved to Melanie's credit card activities. And this is definitely of interest to both credit card companies and local authorities. So I should report them all at once? I asked. Frank shook his head. No, you need to create a domino effect. Strategic pressure applied at the right points, in the right sequence. And most importantly, you need to ensure your family doesn't connect these events back to you. Why not? I want them to know it was me. Eventually, yes, but premature revelation gives them time to prepare, to cover tracks. You want them focused on their immediate crises, not on countering your next move. His advice made perfect sense. If my family knew I was behind their troubles, they would unite against me again, potentially even more effectively. But if they believed they were experiencing a string of unrelated consequences for their own actions, they would be too busy saving themselves to coordinate. I spent the next week developing a comprehensive strategy. I needed to appear to have given up, to have accepted my loss, while systematically dismantling the financial house of cards they had built. I sent a final email to my parents, Thomas and Melanie. I can see there's no reasoning with any of you. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. Don't contact me again. Then I went silent and seemingly returned to my normal life. I took Frank's advice and created multiple anonymous email addresses and secure methods for submitting tips and evidence to various authorities. Each report would be detailed, documented, and impossible to dismiss but untraceable back to me. The most challenging part was controlling my impatience. I wanted justice immediately, wanted to see my family face consequences for what they'd done. But strategic revenge required patience and precision. Each domino needed to fall at exactly the right time, creating maximum impact with minimum risk to me. As I finalized my plans, I realized something unexpected. The overwhelming grief and betrayal I had felt was being replaced by a cold, focused determination. They had taken my money, but they had also freed me from the emotional manipulation that had defined our relationship for years. For the first time in my life, I saw my family clearly not as I wished they were, not as they pretended to be, but as they truly were. And with that clarity came power. I was ready to begin. My campaign began on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 month after discovering the theft. The timing was deliberate. Thomas had a pattern of submitting investor reports at the beginning of each month. My father had recently started posting about an exciting new business venture on LinkedIn, and Melanie had just updated her Instagram with photos of a weekend shopping spree in New York. They all believed they had gotten away with it. They were about to learn otherwise. My first target was Thomas's investment scheme. Using one of my anonymous email accounts, I sent a detailed report to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The document outlined the structure of his operation, included statements from his business account, which I had obtained through methods best not detailed, and provided a list of potential victims, mostly retirees from our old neighborhood, who had mentioned their wonderful investment opportunity with young Thomas Hawkins on social media. I included enough specific information to trigger an investigation, but was careful to present it as coming from a concerned investor who had noticed discrepancies, not from someone with intimate knowledge of Thomas's life. I also sent similar information to the state's financial regulatory body and to a journalist at the Boston Globe who specialized in consumer protection stories. 3 days later, while monitoring Thomas's social media, I saw the first sign of impact: a vague post about addressing some administrative confusion with investor documents. By the following week, his normally active profiles had gone quiet. The SEC moved slowly but thoroughly. They wouldn't immediately raid his office, but they would begin investigating, requesting documents, and asking uncomfortable questions. With Thomas's situation developing behind the scenes, I turned my attention to my father. His deception was twofold. He had been fired from his previous job for financial improprieties, but was presenting himself as a successful consultant, and he was now attempting to solicit investments for a new opportunity that showed all the hallmarks of a scam. I created a detailed dossier on his career history, including documentation of his dismissal, obtained from a former colleague of his who had always disliked him, and analysis of his new consulting business that exposed it as essentially non-existent. This information I sent to his entire professional network through an anonymous LinkedIn account created for the purpose, along with a warning about his current investment solicitations. Within hours, my father's phone must have been exploding with messages. His LinkedIn profile suddenly switched to private, and several connections publicly distanced themselves from him. A week later, he posted a defensive message about malicious attacks from competitors that received no supportive responses. Melanie's credit card scheme was particularly vulnerable to exposure. Using another secure email account, I reported her activities to the fraud departments of the credit card companies she had targeted, as well as to the local police department's financial crimes unit. I provided transaction records, patterns of behavior, and even screenshots of her boyfriend bragging about their side hustle in private Instagram messages, which a mutual acquaintance had shared with me, unaware of my intentions. The credit card companies moved faster than law enforcement. Within days, all of Melanie's cards, legitimate and fraudulent, were frozen pending investigation. Her Instagram stories abruptly shifted from shopping hauls to complaints about technical issues with her accounts. Her boyfriend suddenly became much less visible in her posts. Throughout this first phase, I maintained my facade of having moved on. I went to work, socialized with friends, even posted occasional positive updates on my own social media. When a family friend tentatively asked how I was doing, I replied that I had accepted things and was focused on rebuilding. The message would inevitably get back to my family, reinforcing their belief that I had surrendered. Behind this calm exterior, I monitored the growing chaos in their lives with methodical precision. I set up Google alerts for their names, tracked public records for new filings, and occasionally used my technical skills to check on the status of the various investigations I had initiated. 2 weeks into my campaign, the first public domino fell. Thomas received a formal notice from the SEC regarding an investigation into his investment activities. He didn't announce this, of course, but one of his investors, Mr. Peterson, my former high school math teacher, posted angrily about receiving a letter regarding potential fraud. That same day, Thomas called me. After a month of silence, his number appearing on my phone was jarring. I let it go to voicemail. "Lindsay, it's Thomas. Look, I know things have been difficult between us, but I'm dealing with some serious accusations right now, completely unfounded, of course, and I could really use your help. With your tech background, maybe you could help me organize my records? Call me back." The desperation in his voice was satisfying, but I didn't respond. This was just the beginning. The next day, my father also attempted contact via email. "Lindsay, I know you're still upset about the financial situation, and I understand, but someone is spreading malicious lies about me to my professional contacts. My reputation is being destroyed. As my daughter, I expect your support during this attack on our family. Call me." No apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done, just an entitlement to my loyalty and assistance. I archived the email without responding. By the end of the third week, my parents' financial situation had deteriorated significantly. A public records search revealed they had taken out a second mortgage on their home. My father's car was listed for sale on multiple websites. My mother, who had always been active in local social circles, had withdrawn from her volunteer positions and book club. Melanie was the last to reach out, sending a text that read simply, "I know it was you. I didn't respond, but her accusation concerned me." I had been careful to cover my tracks, creating multiple layers of separation between my actions and their consequences. Still, Melanie had always been perceptive. I would need to be even more cautious moving forward. Despite her suspicion, she had no proof, and more importantly, no leverage. All 3 of my family members were now facing investigations into their own wrongdoing. Even if they suspected my involvement, accusing me would only draw more attention to their activities. The most powerful moment of this phase came unexpectedly. I was grabbing coffee at my usual cafe when I overheard 2 women at the next table discussing that investment scheme that's targeting seniors. One of them mentioned Thomas by name, describing how her parents had narrowly avoided investing their retirement savings with him after seeing warnings online. "I heard his whole family is involved," the woman said. "The father was fired for embezzlement, and the sister is under investigation for credit card fraud." "What about the other sister?" her friend asked. "I thought there were 2. "No idea," the first woman replied, "probably just as bad as the rest of them. I should have been hurt by being lumped in with them, but instead, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The Hawkins family reputation was crumbling, but I was no longer defined by that name or those connections. I was building my own identity, separate from their shadow. That evening, I received an email from my bank. After reviewing the fraud documentation I had submitted, they had decided to credit back $15,000 to my account, the amount that had been directly transferred to my father's account, and was thus the easiest to trace. It wasn't the full amount stolen, but it was a start, and more importantly, validation that I was on the right path. As October ended, I took stock of my progress. Thomas was under SEC investigation and had lost most of his investors. My father's professional reputation was in tatters, with no prospects for his consulting business. Melanie's credit lines were frozen, and she and her boyfriend were being investigated for fraud. My parents had been forced to leverage their home to cover immediate expenses. None of them had connected the dots to realize I was behind it all, except possibly Melanie, who had nothing but suspicion. They were too busy dealing with their individual crises to coordinate their responses or investigate the source. The first phase of my plan had succeeded beyond my expectations, but it was just the beginning. The isolated pressure points I had targeted were now ready to be connected, creating a comprehensive picture of a family engaged in systematic financial fraud, with me as their most significant victim. Phase 2 would bring everything into the open. By mid-November, the individual crises my family members faced had begun to converge into a perfect storm. No longer were they dealing with separate problems. Their carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing simultaneously from multiple directions. The time had come to accelerate the process. I learned through the neighborhood grapevine, my mother's former book club friend, Ellen, who had always liked me, that my parents had called an emergency family meeting at their house. Thomas and Melanie were both staying there temporarily. Thomas, because his apartment was being renovated, more likely he could no longer afford the rent, and Melanie, because her boyfriend had been arrested for credit card fraud, leaving her without her partner in crime and main source of income. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday evening. Early that morning, I received a text from my mother. "Family meeting tonight at 7. Your presence is requested." No explanation, no context, just a summons, as if I were still the obedient daughter who would drop everything when called. I decided to attend. Not out of obedience, but because it presented the perfect opportunity to observe the chaos firsthand and adjust my strategy accordingly. I responded with a simple, "I'll be there," and spent the day preparing mentally for the confrontation. The house I had grown up in looked shabbier than I remembered. The lawn was overgrown, the paint peeling in places. The flower beds that my mother had once meticulously maintained now overrun with weeds. I parked my Honda on the street, noticing that my father's luxury SUV had been replaced by a 10-year-old Toyota. Mom opened the door before I could knock, her face tight with stress. She had lost weight, and the expensive facelift she had purchased with my stolen money now gave her face an unnaturally taut appearance that failed to mask her anxiety. "You came," she said, sounding surprised despite my confirmation text. "I said I would," I replied neutrally, stepping past her into the foyer. The living room held the rest of my family. Dad sat in his recliner, a tumbler of whiskey already half empty beside him. He looked older, the confident posture replaced by a slight stoop. Thomas paced by the window, his designer clothes now looking rumpled and worn. Melanie sat curled on the couch, her expression a mixture of defiance and fear. "Lindsay," my father acknowledged me with a nod. "Glad you could join us for this family discussion." "What's this about?" I asked, though I knew perfectly well what had brought them together. "We seem to be experiencing an unusual string of challenges," he said carefully. "Financial and legal issues that have arisen simultaneously for all of us. It's quite a coincidence." The way he emphasized coincidence made it clear he suspected coordination behind their troubles, though he didn't directly accuse me. "I've lost everything," Thomas burst out, abandoning any pretense. "The SEC has frozen all my accounts. Investors are threatening lawsuits. Someone sent them detailed analyses of my business structure that make it look like I was running some kind of scam." "Were you?" I asked mildly. He glared at me. "That's not the point. Someone deliberately targeted me." "My cards are all canceled," Melanie added. "And Jason was arrested last week. They're saying we committed fraud, but they won't tell us who reported it. And I, my father interjected, have had my professional reputation systematically destroyed. Colleagues I've known for 20 years won't return my calls. Potential clients have backed out of deals. Someone has been spreading malicious information about me. Malicious but accurate? I couldn't help asking. The room fell silent. My mother, who had retaken her seat on the couch beside Melanie, looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded. "Just that it's interesting how you're all more concerned about who might be exposing your activities than whether those activities were wrong in the first place," I observed. Thomas stopped pacing and turned to face me fully. "It was you, wasn't it?" he accused. "You're behind all of this." I met his gaze steadily but said nothing. "We're about to lose the house," my mother said, her voice cracking. "The second mortgage isn't enough. We can't make the payments anymore." "That's why we called you here," my father said, his tone shifting to one I recognized from childhood, the reasonable, patriarchal voice he used when laying down rules. "We need to pool our resources and develop a unified response to these attacks. Whatever differences we've had, we're still family." The audacity was breathtaking. After stealing my life savings and cutting me off when I objected, they now expected me to help them escape the consequences of their own actions. "What resources would those be?" I asked. "You took everything I had." "That's water under the bridge now," my father dismissed with a wave of his hand. "We need to focus on the future, on preserving what's left of the family's assets and reputation." "Water under the bridge?" I repeated slowly. "You stole $87,000 from me, money I had saved over years of hard work, and it's water under the bridge?" "We've all suffered losses," Thomas interjected. "I've lost my business. Dad's lost his consulting prospects. Melanie's lost her boyfriend. To arrest for fraud, I finished for him. The point is," my father continued, ignoring my comment, "we need to present a united front. The house will have to be sold, but if we pool what resources we have left, we can rent a place together until this blows over." I looked around at their expectant faces and realized they genuinely believed I might agree. In their minds, family loyalty trumped everything, including the theft of my future. "No," I said simply. "What do you mean, no?" my mother demanded. "I mean no. I won't be contributing to the family fund. I won't be living with any of you. And I certainly won't be helping you escape the consequences of your actions." My father's face darkened. "After everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me?" I interrupted, my voice eerily calm even to my own ears. "Raised me to be responsible while you all lived beyond your means? Taught me the value of hard work while you looked for get-rich-quick schemes? Or perhaps you mean stealing my life savings when your irresponsibility finally caught up with you?" The room fell silent again. Melanie was the first to recover. "Fine," she snapped. "We don't need your help anyway. We'll figure this out ourselves." "Good luck with that," I replied, rising to leave. "I suspect you'll all be quite busy with investigations for the foreseeable future." As I reached the door, my father called after me. "You know, there are rumors circulating about the whole family, including you. Your reputation is being tarnished too, Lindsay. Is that what you want?" I paused, hand on the doorknob. "I'll take my chances. Unlike the rest of you, I have nothing to hide." 3 days after the family meeting, my strategic escalation continued. I had been holding back one key piece of evidence. Emails from Thomas to my father discussing their plan to access my accounts during the family reunion. Thomas had carelessly used his work email, which I had gained access to through means I won't detail here. These emails I now forwarded to the SEC investigator handling Thomas's case, again through an anonymous account. The effect was immediate. What had been a financial investigation expanded to include charges of conspiracy and fraud. Both Thomas and my father were called in for formal questioning. Simultaneously, I tipped off a local news reporter who had been following stories of investment fraud targeting seniors. I provided enough information to point them toward the official investigations without revealing my personal connection. 2 days later, a feature article appeared in the Boston Globe, "Family Business of Fraud. Hawkins' Investment Scheme Targeted Vulnerable Seniors." The article detailed how Thomas had targeted retirees from our old neighborhood, using family connections and trust to secure investments that were then misappropriated. It mentioned my father's involvement as a silent partner who had previously been dismissed from his corporate position for financial irregularities. It also referenced ongoing investigations into related credit card fraud involving other family members. The public exposure was devastating. My parents, who had built their identity around their social standing, became instant pariahs. They stopped attending church. My mother resigned from her remaining social committees. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid talking to them. The financial pressures mounted as well. With their scams exposed and under investigation, all legitimate income sources dried up. The bank accelerated foreclosure proceedings on the house. My father's car was repossessed. Thomas's luxury apartment was emptied, the contents seized to partially repay investors. Melanie, always the most adaptable, attempted to distance herself from the others. She moved in with a friend and took a legitimate job at a coffee shop, presenting herself on social media as the innocent victim of her family's schemes. Few believed her, especially after evidence of her own fraud activities became public. Through it all, I maintained my position of observing but not directly engaging. When contacted by investigators, I cooperated fully, providing documentation of the theft from my accounts but never mentioning my role in exposing their other activities. To the outside world, I appeared to be simply another victim of the Hawkins family's web of deception, perhaps the primary victim, but not the architect of their downfall. The chaos reached its peak when my parents were forced to attend an emergency auction of their household goods to partially satisfy creditors. The same neighbors who had attended their lavish holiday parties now came to pick through their possessions at bargain prices. My mother, I heard, locked herself in the bathroom and refused to watch. Thomas, facing the most serious legal consequences, attempted to shift blame to our father, claiming he had been pressured into the investment scheme. My father, in turn, insisted he had merely offered advice, not direction. Their unified front fractured as each tried to save themselves at the other's expense. Throughout November and December, I watched the family that had betrayed me disintegrate from the inside. The people who had once presented themselves as moral, respectable, and loving were revealed as the frauds they truly were, not just to me, but to everyone who knew them. By Christmas, the family home had been sold at foreclosure. My parents moved into a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Thomas was living with a reluctant former college roommate, his assets frozen pending trial. Melanie had doubled down on her innocent victim narrative but found few supporters. None of them contacted me during the holidays, the first Christmas in my life without a single call or card from a family member. Instead of sadness, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The facade had been stripped away, the manipulative bonds broken. In their place was a clarity I had never known before. The final piece of my escalation phase came in January, when an anonymous source, me, through several layers of digital protection, released a comprehensive document to all relevant investigators, connecting the separate cases into a clear pattern of family-wide financial fraud. The document included the theft from my accounts as just one example of their systematic deception. This consolidated approach accelerated all pending investigations. What might have been handled as separate, relatively minor cases became a comprehensive criminal enterprise investigation. The consequences for my family would be far more severe as a result. By February, my revenge had succeeded beyond my initial expectations. My family had lost their home, their reputations, their financial security, and most of their social connections. They faced serious legal consequences for their various frauds, and most importantly, they had turned on each other, destroying the unified front that had enabled their behavior for so many years. The final confrontation was approaching, the moment when I would reveal myself not just as their victim, but as the architect of their downfall. By late February, the separate threads of investigation into my family's activities had coalesced into a comprehensive case. Thomas faced multiple federal charges related to investment fraud. My father was named as a co-conspirator and additionally charged with tax evasion. Melanie had negotiated a plea deal on lesser charges in exchange for testimony against her boyfriend. My mother, while not directly charged, had been named in multiple civil suits from creditors. They had lost everything: home, possessions, social standing, and most critically, their carefully constructed facades of respectability. The only thing they didn't yet know was my role in orchestrating their downfall. It was time to change that. I chose the setting carefully: Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Boston. It was expensive enough to strain their now limited resources but public enough to prevent any dramatic scenes. I made the reservation for a Tuesday evening in March, nearly 6 months after discovering the theft of my savings. The invitation was simple, sent via email to all 4 of them. I'd like to discuss a possible resolution to our family situation. Dinner at Marcello's, Tuesday at 7 p.m. My treat, Lindsay. Their responses came quickly, too quickly, revealing their desperation. My father's reply attempted to maintain a tone of authority. We'll be there. It's good you're finally ready to discuss things rationally. My mother added unnecessary exclamation points. Looking forward to seeing you, honey. Thomas and Melanie simply confirmed their attendance without comment. I arrived early, dressed in a sleek black dress that I had purchased specifically for the occasion, professional, confident, and completely different from anything they had seen me wear before. I selected a table in the corner with a clear view of the entrance and ordered a glass of expensive Cabernet while I waited. My mother arrived first, wearing a dress I recognized from years ago, now slightly outdated and hanging loosely on her thinner frame. She spotted me and hurried over, arms outstretched for a hug that I smoothly avoided by standing and extending my hand instead. Lindsay, she faltered, awkwardly accepting the handshake. You look different. Thank you, I replied, neither confirming nor denying the implicit question in her statement. My father and Thomas arrived together, both attempting to project confidence despite their visibly worn appearance. My father's suit, once impeccably tailored, now bunched around his shoulders. Thomas had abandoned his usual designer labels for something off the rack. Melanie came last, slipping into the restaurant 7 minutes late, her entrance less dramatic than her usual style. She had dyed her hair a more subdued color and wore minimal makeup, part of her ongoing effort to rebrand herself as the responsible, hard-working victim of circumstances beyond her control. Well, my father said once we were all seated, "This is nice, the family together again." He reached for the wine list, but I smoothly intercepted it. "I've already ordered a bottle for the table," I said. "The Barolo." "I believe it was always your favorite, Dad." He nodded, a flicker of surprise crossing his face at my knowledge of his preference and willingness to splurge on a wine that cost more than he could now afford. "So," Thomas interjected, cutting to the chase, "your email mentioned a resolution. We've all been through a lot these past months, and I think we're all ready to put this unfortunate situation behind us." "Unfortunate situation," I repeated, swirling my wine. That's one way to describe systematic fraud, theft, and betrayal. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. The waiter arrived with the bottle of Barolo, going through the ritual of presenting it to my father, who automatically reached for it before I intervened. "I'm the host tonight," I reminded him. The waiter pivoted smoothly, presenting the bottle to me instead. I approved it, and he poured for everyone. Once he departed, I raised my glass. "To family," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, "and to consequences." No one moved to join the toast. "Lindsay," my mother began, her voice taking on the placating tone she had always used during family conflicts, "we know you're still upset about what happened with your savings. But as we've tried to explain, the family was in crisis. We had no choice." "There's always a choice," I countered calmly. "You chose to steal from me instead of asking for help. You chose to block my calls and close ranks when I confronted you. You chose to lie to family friends, to paint me as the villain. That's ancient history now," my father dismissed. "We've all paid a heavy price these past months. Surely it's time to move forward as a family." I took another sip of wine, savoring the moment. Have you ever wondered why everything fell apart for all of you at exactly the same time? SEC investigations, fraud charges, credit inquiries, professional reputation destruction all simultaneously. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? Thomas's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it wasn't a coincidence," I replied, setting down my glass precisely. "It was me." The shock on their faces was everything I had imagined during those dark nights planning my revenge. "That's impossible," my father sputtered. "You couldn't have—" I reported Thomas's Ponzi scheme to the SEC, providing detailed financial records and a list of victims. I continued, my voice level. "I exposed your history of financial misappropriation to your entire professional network, Dad, with documentation from your former employer." I reported Melanie and her boyfriend to the credit card companies and authorities, complete with transaction records and evidence of fraud. You destroyed your own family, my mother whispered, horrified. No, I corrected her. I exposed what you had already done. I simply removed the curtain you were hiding behind. Why? Thomas demanded, his face flushed with anger. Because we borrowed some money from you? This level of revenge is insane. You didn't borrow anything, I said, my composure never wavering. You stole $87,000, my entire savings, money I had worked years to accumulate. And when I confronted you, you didn't apologize or offer to make it right. You blocked my calls, you turned family friends against me, you closed ranks and expected me to simply accept it. We were desperate, my father argued. The house was about to be foreclosed. Because of your own poor decisions, I interrupted. Your gambling on bad investments, Thomas's fraudulent business, Mom's unnecessary cosmetic procedures, Melanie's extravagant lifestyle funded by credit card fraud. None of that was my responsibility to fix, especially not at the cost of my entire financial future. Melanie, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. How did you get the evidence? Some of these things you couldn't have known. I smiled slightly. I'm very good at what I do, better than any of you ever bothered to notice or acknowledge. The waiter approached to take our dinner orders, but I waved him away. We'll need a few more minutes. Once he was out of earshot, my father's demeanor changed, desperation replacing anger. What do you want, Lindsay? Money? We don't have any left. Revenge? You've already accomplished that. What more could you possibly want from us? Justice, I said simply, and restitution. I reached into my purse and removed a folder, placing it on the table. These are the terms I'm prepared to accept to stop actively working against you. You're blackmailing us now? Thomas scoffed. I'm offering you a choice, I corrected. Something you never gave me. I opened the folder and removed 4 copies of a document I had prepared, sliding one to each of them. This is a repayment agreement. It acknowledges the theft of $87,000 from my accounts, plus interest, for a total of $95,000. It outlines a payment schedule based on your respective abilities to pay, with quarterly financial reviews to adjust as needed. They stared at the documents in disbelief. You can't be serious, my father finally said. We have nothing left. You'll work and earn just like I did, I replied. It may take years, but you will repay what you stole. And if we refuse? Melanie challenged. I closed the folder. Then I continue providing evidence to investigators, creditors, and journalists. I have more than you know, much more. The charges you're currently facing are just the beginning of what could be brought against you. You would send your own family to prison, my mother stated, not quite a question. You stole my future without hesitation, I reminded her. But I'm actually offering you a way out. Sign the agreement, make regular payments as you're able, and I stop actively working to expose you. I can't withdraw evidence already provided, but I won't supply more. This is extortion, Thomas muttered. This is consequence, I corrected. Something this family has always been short on. I signaled the waiter for the check, having never intended to actually eat dinner with them. As he processed my credit card, I stood to leave. You have 48 hours to sign and return the agreements, I informed them. My contact information is on the last page. Lindsay, my mother called as I turned to go. What happened to you? You were always such a good, sweet girl. I looked back at her, at all of them, these people who shared my blood but had never truly been on my side. I grew up, I answered. I finally saw this family clearly. And I decided I deserved better. As I walked away, I heard my father's voice, surprisingly small. We needed the money, we really did. I paused without turning. So did I. Outside the restaurant, I took a deep breath of the cool March air, feeling neither triumph nor regret, only the clean, clear certainty that I had reclaimed control of my life. Whether they signed the agreements or not, I had accomplished what I set out to do. I had exposed their fraud, dismantled their facades, and forced them to face the reality of who they truly were. More importantly, I had freed myself from the emotional manipulation that had defined our relationship for decades. The money had been important, it represented years of work and sacrifice, but the true theft had been my agency, my boundaries, my right to be treated with basic respect. That I had reclaimed completely. 3 days later, the signed agreements arrived by certified mail. All 4 signatures, reluctant but legally binding, acknowledging the theft and committing to repayment. It wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't reconciliation. It was accountability, the first time they had ever faced true consequences for their actions. It was enough. 1 year after the confrontation at Marcello's, I stood on the front porch of my new home, a modest but charming colonial in a quiet suburb outside Boston. It wasn't the dream house I had originally saved for that plan, had been delayed by the theft, but it was mine, purchased with a combination of recovered funds, additional savings from the past year, and a mortgage I could comfortably afford. The journey to this moment had been complicated. True to the agreement, my family had begun making small but regular payments toward their debt. My father had found work as a sales associate at a home improvement store, a humbling position for a man who once commanded a corner office. My mother had taken a full-time position at her elementary school, working additional hours as a tutor to supplement her income. Thomas, facing the most serious legal consequences, had avoided prison through a plea deal that required significant community service and financial restitution to his investors. Melanie had remained at her coffee shop job, slowly working her way up to shift supervisor. Their payments, while consistent, were modest. It would take years, perhaps decades, to fully repay what they had taken. But the money, while important, had become secondary to the psychological freedom I had gained. In the months following our confrontation, each family member had attempted reconciliation on their terms. My father sent a formal-sounding email suggesting we move forward in a productive manner. My mother left tearful voicemails reminiscing about happier times and suggesting Sunday dinners. Thomas proposed a fresh start once his legal troubles were behind him. Melanie, always the most direct, simply texted, "Can we talk?" I responded to each of them with the same message. "I'm not ready for personal contact beyond the terms of our agreement. Please respect my boundaries." Some might view this as coldness or an inability to forgive, but through weekly sessions with Dr. Harper, a therapist specializing in family trauma, I had come to understand that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. It doesn't even require communication. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, Dr. Harper had explained during one particularly difficult session. It means releasing the anger and resentment that binds you to the person who harmed you. It doesn't mean inviting them back into your life, especially if they haven't demonstrated meaningful change. And my family, despite their current difficulties, had not fundamentally changed. Their apologies centered on their suffering rather than my pain. Their proposed reconciliations came with expectations and conditions. They spoke of moving forward without ever fully acknowledging the past. So I chose a different path. I forgave them internally, releasing the burning anger that had consumed me during those early months. But I maintained firm boundaries, protecting the peace and stability I had worked so hard to rebuild. The most unexpected development came 3 months after the confrontation, when my cousin Rebecca reached out. The daughter of my father's estranged brother, Rebecca, had distanced herself from the extended family years ago for reasons I had never fully understood. "I heard about what happened," she said when we met for coffee. "It didn't surprise me, honestly. Uncle Richard pulled something similar with my dad years ago, took money from their shared inheritance, claiming Dad had agreed to it. That's why they haven't spoken in 15 years. Rebecca had built her own life away from the family dysfunction, creating healthy relationships and strong boundaries. She became an unexpected ally in my healing journey, someone who understood the specific toxicity of the Hawkins family dynamics without trying to pull me back into them. Through Rebecca, I also connected with my Uncle James for the first time in years. Our renewed relationship brought unexpected healing as I discovered that the family narrative I had been raised with that James was irresponsible, lazy, and jealous of my father's success was entirely fabricated. In reality, James had refused to participate in one of my father's questionable investment schemes, which had branded him as disloyal. "You remind me of myself at your age," he told me during our first dinner together. "Willing to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you." Beyond family, I focused on building a network of genuine friendships. Kate remained my steadfast ally, having supported me through the darkest days of betrayal and revenge. Through a software developers meetup group, I connected with people who shared my professional interests and valued my expertise. I volunteered at a financial literacy program for teens, using my experience to help young people establish healthy money habits early. At work, my focus and performance had actually improved. Without the underlying anxiety of family drama and manipulation, I found myself more creative and productive. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a substantial promotion, accelerating my savings, rebuilding beyond what I had anticipated. The purchase of my new home represented more than just financial recovery. It was a tangible symbol of my independence and resilience. No family members were invited to my modest housewarming gathering, just friends who had proven their loyalty and support during the past difficult year. As I arranged furniture and hung artwork in rooms that were completely mine, I reflected on how much had changed. The person I had been before the theft, the responsible daughter always seeking approval, always making excuses for her family's behavior, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, clearer about her boundaries, and more discerning about who deserved a place in her life. One evening, about 15 months after discovering the theft, I received an unexpected email from my mother. "I found this photo while clearing out the storage unit. Thought you might want it." Attached was a scanned photograph of me at age 10, proudly displaying a science fair ribbon. What struck me wasn't the image itself, but my expression: determined, proud, uncompromising. Somewhere along the way, that girl had learned to compromise, to accommodate, to expect less than she deserved. Now, she had reclaimed herself. I didn't respond to the email, but I printed the photo and placed it on my refrigerator, not as a connection to my mother, but as a reminder of my own resilience. The money continued to trickle in from my family, each payment a small acknowledgement of the debt they owed. I deposited these funds into a separate account, mentally detached from my daily finances. Whether they eventually repaid the full amount or not, no longer defined my security or success. 2 years after the theft, I received a letter from Thomas, now working at an entry-level position in a legitimate financial services company. Unlike previous communications, this one contained no requests for reconciliation, no excuses for past behavior, just a simple acknowledgement. "I've been thinking about what happened and my role in it. For the first time in my life, I'm facing consequences I can't charm or talk my way out of. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a relationship. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything. We were wrong and I was wrong. You deserved better." I didn't respond, but I felt something shift inside me, not a desire to reconnect, but a quiet recognition that perhaps, in some small way, one member of my family was beginning to understand the true meaning of accountability. Dr. Harper once asked me if I regretted the methodical way I had exposed my family's wrongdoing. "Some might view your actions as excessive or vindictive," she observed. "Do you ever question whether you went too far?" I considered the question carefully before responding. "They didn't just take my money," I explained. "They took my trust, my security, my belief in family. When I confronted them, they dismissed my pain and closed ranks against me. They left me no other recourse." "And now?" she prompted. "Now I understand that what happened wasn't a sudden aberration, but the natural culmination of patterns that had existed all along. The theft was just the most extreme expression of dynamics that had always been present: the entitlement, the manipulation, the expectation that I would always put their needs above my own. The most profound healing came not from the money recovered or the justice served, but from this understanding. My family hadn't suddenly changed, they had finally revealed who they truly were. And in doing so, they had freed me from the obligation to be who they wanted me to be." 3 years after the theft, I sat on the back deck of my home on a warm summer evening. The garden I had planted was blooming with colorful perennials. Inside, friends were gathering for a dinner party, genuine friends who knew my story and supported my choices without judgment. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another quarterly payment had been deposited into the restitution account. I acknowledged it briefly before returning my phone to my pocket. The money mattered, but it no longer defined me. Family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, boundaries, and genuine care. Sometimes the healthiest family is the one you build yourself, with people who choose to treat you with the dignity everyone deserves. That was the true lesson of my journey, not that betrayal destroys, but that we can rebuild something stronger and more authentic from the ruins. As the sun set over my garden, I felt gratitude not for what had been taken, but for what I had reclaimed: my independence, my boundaries, and most importantly, my power to define my own worth. No theft could ever take that away again. What would you do if someone in your family betrayed your trust this deeply? Would you seek revenge, try to forgive, or cut them off completely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the family you choose is more valuable than the one you're born into. Thanks for listening to my story, and I hope it helps anyone going through similar struggles realize they're not alone.